just about a couple of years back, and in fact, we all went through the first round of domestic transfer pricing compliance in November last year. So it's a relatively new law, but it draws upon significantly from the existing transfer pricing framework, and at least the basic framework is what you've already seen in last few lectures as a part of this course. So before I begin my discussion on specifics around domestic transfer pricing, a quick poll. How many of you have actually signed 13CP dealing with domestic EP last year? Okay, next question is how many of you have prepared the domestic transfer pricing documentation either for last year or this year? Sometimes the question 1 and 2 are independent, that's why I specifically asked it. And how many of you have opened and read the new section around domestic transfer pricing? Okay, quite a lot. So let me give you let me leave you with a question right at the beginning of this session, and we'll try and discuss it at the end of our session. And this question is inspired from the recent adjustments that have happened in case of Shell and other cases. Do you think that the domestic transfer pricing provisions, is it an independent charging code by itself? Can you do a domestic transfer pricing adjustment divorce of what's written in section 48.2 or 80IA? Can a transfer pricing officer just invoke section 92 subclause 2A and make a transfer pricing adjustment under domestic DP? That's my question. We will deal with it after we go through some of these slides, but in case some of you have thoughts, you can gather your thoughts, and I'll be happy to hear your views as well. I'll be focusing on the concept of domestic transfer pricing, the law on domestic transfer pricing, and then the specific aspect relating to 40A2 transactions. There's a separate session tomorrow covering section 80IA 8 and 10 transactions, so I will not go into the details of that part, but I'll focus on the basics and then 40A2 related transactions. So coming back to the basics, why there's a need for transfer pricing. I think that's fairly well known. Last over 60 years of tax law, we all know that how loss-making taxpayers or assessees or entities are used to minimize the tax incidence since 1980s, when we had introduced the tax holiday provisions, section 10A, section 10B, series of deductions under chapter 6A came with the evil of tax avoidance, wherein you would attribute more profits to an undertaking which is eligible for tax holiday, and therefore minimize the tax incidence. I think some of these points are very well known, and people have indulged into some of these aspects, and therefore there is a clear need for something which sort of which protects the revenue base from these unscrupulous practices. One point on a conceptual level that comes to my mind is that after general anti-avoidance rules, GAR, come into effect from next financial year, let's hope that there is no further deferral of GAR in India. I think the scope of domestic transfer pricing, the way it is today, it is in a very narrow sense. I think conceptually that scope perhaps may get further extended once GAR comes in, especially in case of tax avoidance transactions using loss-making entities or misuse of the tax holiday provisions. Is domestic transfer pricing new? Answer is yes and no. There are several provisions in the income tax law, which some of them have been there for last over 3 or 4 decades, are there, which in a way follow the principle of fair pricing or fair profitability. The two provisions on this slide are very well known and very obvious. 48.2, assessing officer has a power to disallow the expenses having regard to the fair value, legitimate needs of the business, benefits test. In tax audit report every year we sort of test these transactions and report. We have several judgments which say that commercial expediency is what needs to be seen while deciding this disallowance. ATI 8 and 10, these provisions, especially after the transfer pricing was introduced, have come into limelight. What ATI 8 and 10 in simple terms say that if a tax holiday unit is earning more than ordinary profits or more than reasonable profits, then those excess profits will not be eligible for the deduction under Chapter 6A or Section 10A or 10B. 10A, 10B of course is now not there in the law. It's only SEZ units which are eligible for 10AA deduction, and of course Chapter 6A covers several undertakings and which are still eligible for tax holiday. So as far as the STP EOU units are concerned, ATI 8 and 10 as such has no relevance today. But ATI 8 and 10 in effect again ensuring the principle of fair pricing, and that was there in the law. Other than that, at least there are three other provisions where the fair pricing concept is there in the Income Tax Act, and one more which I missed adding in this slide. The first one is famous 50C. What you do in the land transfer, if the transaction value is lesser than the stamp duty value, the transfer assessing officer has a power to substitute the stamp duty value. I feel it's essentially a domestic transfer price relating to property transactions, of course, land and building. Same is the case with Section 56, which was recently introduced in the hands of the recipient. The second aspect, the second example that I could think of is the depreciation. Again, this section has not been sort of invoked or used many times, but if there is an explanation in Section 43(1) which defines the actual cost, and one of the explanations says that where the actual cost resulting in depreciation results in additional depreciation with the objective of reduction of tax liability, assessing officer has a power to recompute the actual cost. Sale and lease back transactions is a classic example where some of these sections were invoked. Again, I feel this is a classic example of a domestic fair pricing qua asset acquisition, depreciable assets. Another point is value of any benefit or perquisite derived from exercise of business or profession. Now, these are not sort of cash or cash equivalent tangible receipts that a businessman earns, but the perquisite that results from business, you have to ascribe some value and bring it to tax under Section 28. Again, in principle, it follows a arm's length principle or a fair pricing or a fair value principle. Another example, last year, continuing with Section 50C, land transactions where the land is stock in trade in the hands of the builder, again the stamp duty valuation provisions were introduced, where land is held as stock in trade and bought by the builder. So in substance, there are different provisions in the income tax law even before domestic TP was introduced, which sort of look at the fair value principle, and that same concept has been now extended in a more elaborate manner when we come to the provisions of domestic transfer pricing. Glaxo judgment is the foundation, or I would say mother, which conceived this domestic transfer pricing as an idea. This is a Supreme Court judgment of July 2010 involving several Glaxo entities, wherein there were payments being made within Glaxo entities, and the disallowance under Section 48(2) was being tested, and the matter went before Supreme Court. One of the key arguments in that decision was that all these transactions were revenue neutral. In a sense, one entity is making a payment to another entity. In the hands of the payer, you are seeking to disallow certain expenses. But if you look at in the hands of the recipient, fair taxes or the same amount of tax was being paid. So where is the revenue loss? That was a issue raised from the taxpayer side before the Supreme Court. This judgment is authored by former Chief Justice Kapadia, and in this judgment, Supreme Court has specifically observed that domestic transactions between related parties in certain situations may not be revenue neutral. So they have given two instances in the judgment, use of loss-making entities, the example that we saw earlier. Also the tax arbitrage between transactions between two units because of, for example, tax holiday. We've seen that is a commonly adopted tool, especially windmill power generation units. It's relatively easy to do so. One more example that I could think of, very simple, is that directors, relatives, or wives who are entitled to use exemptions or enjoy higher tax slabs. There are instances where companies or partnerships make payments to these relatives, somehow try and justify they are at arm's length, but essentially it's a tax rate arbitrage which is being explored by the taxpayers in a way that overall tax revenue gets minimized. So Supreme Court very well recognized this fact, and therefore Supreme Court in its judgment recommended government to amend the provisions relating to section 48(2) or ATI 8 and 10 to empower the assessing officer to make the adjustment to the income having regard to the fair value. And two specific observations which have resulted into this law. Supreme Court suggested that AO may apply any of the generally accepted methods of determination of arm's length price, including the methods provided in the transfer pricing regulations. So this is what Supreme Court suggested, that today to apply a 48(2) disallowance, there is no specific guidance given in the Income Tax Act. All the officer has to do is consider the fair value. But what is fair value? You would have looked at in your professional experience and in this course that value is extremely subjective. So there has to be some method to this madness. Supreme Court said that bring some logic, some method, some system to determine the fair value, where the officer will be able to make the determination in a more objective manner. And also Supreme Court specifically suggested introduction of the documentation for which will help in determination of the fair pricing or fair value, and a compulsory audit of this documentation and evaluation in line with the normal transfer pricing. So this is what Supreme Court in Glaxo judgment, which came in July 2010, said. I think here we must give a credit to the government for acting extremely quickly in less than 1.5 years time to take these observations and implement them immediately. And Finance Act 2012 introduced the provisions relating to specified domestic transaction, SDT, and we are loosely referring them as domestic TP or domestic transfer pricing. Any thoughts, any points, any comments so far? This is the backdrop of why domestic TP is there today.
It is implemented in a pre-judicial manner. The intention was to not only to avoid tax neutral transactions. But the way it is, in case of 48 transactions are covered, so even if the tax neutral transactions, they are covered. It was not the intention of the Supreme Court.
Sure.
So to that extent, it is not correct.
Sure. Any other comments on this? By the way, India domestic transfer pricing is present in several other jurisdictions in the domestic law, and India is not the first one amongst the developed countries to sort of implement domestic TP. There are few other countries, many other countries which actually have a more elaborate domestic transfer pricing in their domestic provisions. One more. So Finance Act 2012, I think in last 10 years, Finance Act 2012 will be the most remembered budget as far as the tax provisions are concerned. You had Vodafone amendment, you have domestic TP, several other important changes. So what the memorandum to the Finance Bill 2012 said about domestic transfer pricing is very important. A, bring in the objectivity while determining income and reasonableness of the expenditure from domestic related party transactions. B, create a legally enforceable obligation to maintain the documentation. So what they meant is that in a 48.2 scenario or ATIA 8 scenario, there is no specific documentation that has been that was prescribed. Now there is a legal obligation to maintain such a documentation under the domestic TP. And third aspect is create a monetary threshold of 5 crore rupees for avoiding unnecessary compliance and administrative burden. So again, their intent seems to be fair, that they do not want to burden taxpayers which have transactions which are below 5 crores with this additional compliance. Couple of other interesting points from the memorandum which I had later noted. By the way, 5 crore, what do you think? Is it fair? Is it too low? I remember last year when I spoke at this session, and I asked whether in the clientele that you have, how many would be having transaction value more than 5 crore, and I guess barely 10% of the audience raised their hand. So is that still the trend that is continuing? Is 5 crore a reasonable limit? What do you think? Those who feel reasonable can raise their hands. I feel it is reasonable. It's on the lower side. Okay. So very interesting point in the memorandum. It's also written that extending domestic transfer pricing to all the domestic transactions will add the compliance burden and therefore is not desirable. So therefore they first have restricted it to 48.2 and ATIA 8 transactions. So you will notice that the revenue side transaction, the sale transaction, normal sale transaction between related parties are generally not covered within domestic TP unless it deals with the tax holiday unit. Another point is specified in the memorandum is that there is no specific method to determine the reasonableness of the fair value, and therefore they are prescribing the methods. So this is the intention, or this is the object with which they introduced the domestic transfer pricing provisions. Again, some of these bullets on this point, on this slide, perhaps maybe could be the arguments for the question with which I started with. What is the status of domestic TP? So you may note this particular slide and consider it while giving your response at the end. So what is domestic transfer pricing framework? This one slide captures the gamut of domestic TP, and then in the subsequent slide we will go into the specific sections and try and go through word by word on certain provisions that are there under domestic TP. So domestic TP is applicable to broadly 3 categories of transactions which are there on the left side of the screen. The first one is undertakings to which incentive deductions are provided, 10AA, ATIA, ATIB, ATIAB, which is there, and that covers primarily 2 aspects, ATIA 8 and 10. ATIA 8 deals with inter-unit transfer of goods and services. So if there is a tax holiday unit and a normal tax-paying unit within the same company, transactions between these two will be subject to domestic transfer pricing. The second aspect is transactions between entities having close connection. That's what is stated in ATIA 10, and I'm sure you will deal with more details tomorrow. But these are the transactions which are primarily covered or to which domestic TP compliance is applicable. The second important aspect is the expenditure for which payment is made to the parties which are related parties and which are defined under section 48(2) clause B. And again we'll read the specific section, how it is worded and the potential scope for this section. And third aspect is any other transaction that may be specified. So they have left it open. Luckily for us, there is no such transaction that has been notified. My take, this is a personal view, I think in years time even the revenue side transactions will come under domestic TP, the way the trend is moving. So first test is that it has to be a specified domestic transaction, which is the box on the left side. Then the second and important aspect is the aggregate value of transaction if it exceeds 5 crores. So if it is below 5 crores, then it is not a domestic transfer pricing. One more point which is not there on the slide is that transaction should not be an international transaction. So first of all, it should not be an international transaction. You would have studied what is the definition of international transaction in first few sessions, and there is a specific relevance to this, and we'll look at one case study later. So it should not be an international transaction. Then it should be one of the items on the left box. And the third point is the monetary threshold. If the value exceeds 5 crore, then you are liable to comply the domestic transfer pricing related provisions. And what are the implications? Is that you have to determine the value or the price of arising from these transactions, or price of these transactions having regard to the arm's length price by applying the most appropriate method. Again, you would have understood or learned what is arm's length price and what are the methods that are there to determine arm's length price. These are in the context of international transactions. Second, and the most important aspect is maintain the contemporaneous documentation before filing of the tax returns. Third aspect, which as a chartered accountants maybe most of you will be happy, is that you have to get a certificate from a chartered accountant, and the new 3CEB that was released last year, which is now the filing of 3CEB is mandatory online. In that, certain additional disclosures around domestic TP also were introduced, and of course the deterrent, the penalty, if you fail to comply with these provisions. So there's a 2% penalty which potentially could be damaging and fairly high. So let us come to the specific definition under section 92BA of the Income Tax Act. What it says is that transactions which are covered, the first item, and we'll focus now on 48(2)(b), expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person covered by section 48(2). Yeah, so this is the bare text of the section 92BA. For the purposes of this section and section 92, few other sections, specify domestic transaction in case of this is the last slide at the annexure, which I'm showing you on the screen. In case of assessee means any of the following transaction, not being an international transaction, namely clause 1, any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in clause B of subsection 2 of section 40A. Then there are Roman clauses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and at the end it says, and where the aggregate of such transaction entered into by the assessee in the previous year exceeds a sum of 5 crores. Now, before I come to Roman clause 1, one question, and which is an important interpretation issue, is that this 5 crore limit, should it apply to each of the clauses separately? So clause 1 should be more than 5 crore, clause 2 should be more than 5 crore, clause 3 should be more than 5 crore, or in aggregate? Aggregate. My view is also the same, but there have been interpretations given that the way this and where the aggregate value of such transactions, so such, some people have interpreted to mean that it applies to each of the clauses, and therefore 5 crore limit should be for each clause and not all put together. Just thought I should make this point in case such situation comes. At least in the assessment proceedings, this can be a good defense to save from the penalty risk. Now coming to 40A, again clause 1, any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in clause B of subsection 2 of section 40A. Okay, so if you break down this clause into different aspects, all it says is that it has to be an expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made. So that's the second aspect. And third, the payment should be to persons which are covered under 40A, 40A to B. If I see this, if I read this again and again, somewhere the common understanding is that first there has to be a 40A2 invocation by the assessing officer, and only then domestic transfer pricing can be applied. If I read this clause independently, nowhere it says is that there has to be first invocation of section 40A2B. The moment there is a payment to the party which is covered under 40A2B, it is a specified domestic transfer. It is a specified domestic transaction, which means that all the implications get triggered, which also means that eventually transfer pricing officer has a power to determine arm's length price from this transaction. So at least for me, the important takeaway from this clause is that 92BA perhaps is independent of 48.2B. So even if you meet 92BA test, there could be certain situations where 48 could still be applied, and we'll see that, and vice versa. Any different views on this point? Right. So this is the sort of 92BA is the key section relating to domestic transfer pricing. Before that, let me sort of step back and also take you through the relevant wording of section 92. Section 92 is the this I think is on the previous slide. Section 92 is the key charging section relating to the transfer pricing. The section heading is that computation of income from international transaction having regard to the arm's length price. Section 92(1), you would have studied that any income from international transaction shall be determined having regard to arm's length price, etc., etc. 2A of section 92, what it says is that any allowance for an expenditure or interest or allocation of any cost or expense or any income in relation to specified domestic transaction shall be computed having regard to the arm's length price. So 92(2A) is the section which sort of, if I may say so, an enabling section to apply the domestic TP. This section read with 92BA triggers all the actions which are there under the domestic transfer pricing. Let us come to now 48(2). As we saw, 92BA says that any expenditure in respect to the persons which are covered under 48(2). Let us first see section 48(2). Before we come to the specified persons, let us look at plain vanilla what section 48(2) says, where the assessee incurs any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in clause B of this subsection, and clause B is linked to the domestic TP, and the assessing officer is of the opinion that such expenditure is excessive or unreasonable. So the test is excessive or unreasonable, having regard to the fair market value of the goods, services or facilities for which the payment is made. So this is the first limb, that the expenditure is held to be excessive or unreasonable, or the legitimate needs of the business or profession of the assessee, or the benefit derived by or accruing to him from this transaction. So there are three different reasons why an assessing officer could invoke 48(2)B. One is that excessive or unreasonable expenditure. B, which is independent of A, is legitimate needs of the business. And C, the benefit test, the benefit that is accruing to the assessee. Now this, if you compare with 92BA, 92BA does not have any such additional tests. All it says is that there has to be an expenditure to the persons who are covered under 48(2)B, then domestic TP is applicable. For 48(2), there are three different reasons why